Work is a place you can go to experience healing and connection. Community and connection are all parts of work. Is work about productivity and the output? Is it all about what do we get done? Or is there something more human about work? Life is a team sport. We're not designed to do this alone. This is why we're so obsessed with teamwork. We love teamwork because it's this integrated community where people are leveraging each other's gifts for the sake of getting something done. But it's not just the productivity part, it's the connection part.
Welcome to At the Table, the podcast that lives at the intersection between culture, teamwork, leadership, and organizational health. I'm your host, Pat Lencioni, joined by my co-host from Utah, Cody Thompson. How are we doing today, Cody?
We've finally got some snow, so it's a little chilly here, but my kids are excited to go skiing finally.
That's awesome. And that's why you live. That's one of the reasons to live there. It's beautiful that way.
That's right.
Very good. Hey, what's the title of today's podcast, Cody?
Well, it's titled Cocaine Water.
And I don't think we need much more of an explanation than that. I think everybody knows what that is. But really, what were we going to title it?
Probably something in the vein of like isolation versus connection, something around like connection, people connection.
Right. And I'm going to let you, because you found this story, I want you to tell us where the cocaine water description comes from.
Sure, yeah. So it's actually from a TED Talk that I listened to. I actually tried to look up the guy because I wanted to give him credit, but unfortunately I can't find his name that quickly. A guy gives a TED Talk around, I think the title is something like, what if everything we believed about addiction is wrong, or something like that. And he uses this experiment that took place where they took a rat and put a rat in a cage. And in the cage, it had two options for water to drink. One was just, general tap water, pure, clean water. And the other one was water that was laced with cocaine. And so over and over again, they did an experiment. This rat is inside this cage, by itself. And they were trying to determine, what does addiction look like? Why would this rat, which of these waters would the rat choose? And essentially over and over again, 100% of the time when a rat is in that cage, it starts tasting the cocaine water and eventually becomes addicted to that water and gets to the point where it overdoses on the cocaine water. They're drawing all these conclusions from this experiment. And then another scientist comes along and says, this is not a great experiment to run because the factors are really limited. There's a isolated rat in a cage with only really two options. And so he develops a new experiment that I think they called it something like Rat Park. So rather than a small cage with just two water bottles, they built this giant cage. They put wheels and obstacles and foliage and all this stuff inside the rat park. And most importantly, they put other rats, right? So they had all these like things it could play on. It could, it was far more interesting. But I think the key ingredient they talked about was like there were other rats in this other cage. So when they ran this other experiment in Rat Park, they still had two water bottles on the cage walls, same water bottles, one laced with cocaine, one normal water bottle, and 100% of the rats in that chose the fresh water. So there was zero overdoses to the point of death for the rats in Rat Park. And one of the conclusions that this guy is drawing on the TED Talk, I think one of the poignant lines is, what if the opposite of addiction is actually connection? The idea that we need connection, we're wired for being around other people and animals, even being around other animals. So he's drawing all these conclusions as it relates to addiction, but it started to pique a conversation that you and I were having around work. And what does that look like? And how do you, when people are isolated at work, what does that lead to? And the behaviors that stem from that. So that was the stimulus for cocaine water episode.
Stimulus, if you will, as you say. And
Stimulant.
It's so important to understand this, at that most basic level. And we've talked about this in a lot of podcasts, but we heal at work. Work is a ministry. We need one another. God made us in our working geniuses to need other people. And when we decide, I don't know if I really need that, I think a phone call and a two-dimensional Zoom call every once in a while will be okay for me. It's just not the case. And so often we find companies and people saying we don't need to work together. And yet what we usually do is we preach to the leaders and say, make your people come back to work. But that's a policy that doesn't really understand what's going on. You and Tracy gave us a great insight the other day, and she said, Actually, we think this podcast really needs to go out to employees as much as it does to leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of people out there that are like, oh, I wish my company would just let me work from home. And what they need to realize is that that's bad for them. And an overdosed rat on cocaine water can attest to the fact that we get something so important from connection to others. And that is why people, regardless of the policy of the company, should want to be at work for their sake and for the sake of their colleagues. And it's why leaders should help them understand that it's not just they're trying to control them, they're actually trying to do something that's good for their lives.
I love the way we are kind of couching this, Pat, because I think it was 20 episodes ago or something where we said, this is our last episode about remote work. We'll never do this thing again, which I don't think this is an episode about remote work. No. I think that what we're talking about is like our philosophy of work. And when you start this, this response with, we've talked on this podcast about work is a place you can go to experience healing and connection. So often we talk about life is a team sport. We're not designed to do this alone, that community and connection are all parts of work. I think it's more of a conversation around like, we've had this, when we were in the remnants of COVID, we had this conversation of like, is work about productivity and the output? Is it all about just like, what do we get done? Or is there something more human about work? And this appeal to say, hey, connection is one of the primary reasons that work can help us thrive. This is why we're so obsessed with teamwork, right, Pat? Is like, we love teamwork because it's this integrated community where people are leveraging each other's gifts for the sake of getting something done. But it's not just the part. It's the connection part.
I was on a podcast yesterday and somebody was asking about all of the...
How dare you go on podcasts without me?
Other podcasts. I know. I cheated on you, Cody. I cheated on you. This woman named Hala Taha. She has a bunch of different things. You can look her up. It was a really good podcast, I think. She really asked me about all the things we do, Cody. It was really good. One of the things I realized is I started my career in this company because I wanted people to experience more dignity and satisfaction in work. But the beauty of what we do is that productivity and dignity go together. Mm-hmm. It's not like when you go to leaders, you say, hey, you have to balance these things. It's like the more connected and whole people feel, the more they get done, the happier customers are, investors are, the bottom line, it all goes together. And that's a beautiful thing. And when we don't understand that, we make decisions that are actually really bad for the business. And I talked to a CEO a couple of days ago, a great guy, and he talked about after COVID, they shut down all their offices and went remote. And now they've just decided to keep doing that. They've cut costs. But he has this one division that is overseas in a developing country. And he said, that is actually the best manifestation of our culture. We have like 60 people that work together in a foreign country that's not a very wealthy country, and they care about each other, they know each other, they live life together. And he goes, we like that part of our business better. And what that comes down to is they do have to be together more. Now, having said that, you could have a remote company where people feel more connected than people that work together. There are companies. That's why this is not about a policy. It's about creating an environment where people in Rat Park actually do enjoy one another's company and work well together. Because there are people that have built good cultures remotely on Zoom. And there are others that people come to work every day and they sit in a cubicle by themselves and they might as well be a rat drinking cocaine water. But all other things being equal, if people don't have that interaction, it's just problematic. So the question is, we should want to go to work. As leaders, we should create a space for people to go to work, but then we have to build a healthy culture.
There's so much in what you just said, Pat, that I want to pull out more and tease out more is the idea of like you couple dignity and, productivity. A question that came to mind as you were talking about that is, can you have dignity in isolation? Because there's so much of that requires, you and I were in a meeting yesterday where you said, I think we need to hire these people in twos and have them be together because 1 + 1 = 5. And in part, when we started like really fleshing out why there are benefits to that, there's a couple of ways, right? One is that when things go really well, having someone to share that with is really important. But then there's this other sort of mitigating the downside risk is like when something goes really poorly, you have somebody to share that with. In isolation, if you're like in a coaching session or in a client session, and this is why we send our principal consultants out in twos, and we've all experienced this when we've been in a room with a client by ourselves and tried to go home and articulate what happened to our spouses or to our colleagues, it doesn't go well,
No.
and you feel isolated. You feel like, well, nobody's ever going to understand how that actually went.
And what's funny? And when something goes badly, having somebody to share it with can actually change it from misery to humor.
Right.
So I do a lot of speaking, not near as much as I used to. And I never really spoke all the time. But I used to go out by myself because if somebody paid us X amount of dollars to speak, one of us going out meant we made more money. We didn't have to spend money on another person traveling in a hotel room. Early in the company's history, before you got here, Cody, we were just like, never again, because it was miserable for me. The speeches weren't as good. We never debriefed them very well. So we've always just said, I'm never going to go out there without somebody else. And it makes such a difference, both in terms of the productivity and the quality of what I do, because I talk to somebody else and they prep me for it. But just for me not feeling alone, them having connection to the work. And heck, we rotate. Different people go sometimes. Aside from productivity and effectiveness, which is important, just the pure work experience, the dignity and the relationships that get built by doing things together is worth it alone. So even if productivity and connection didn't go together, connection is worth it. It's just a no-brainer when you realize it actually makes everything better. But if you're measuring things in terms of short-term cost, you would never do it, because we did take a hit in our margins on a speech when we sent another person. It was so worth it. It was so worth it. And the truth is, I could do more speeches because I enjoyed it. Whereas if I'd been going out by myself, I'd have said, no, I don't want to do anymore. It's too lonely. It's too frustrating.
Yeah. I want to go back to one other thing you talked about, Pat, because this, to further emphasize the point that this isn't a work from home Zoom podcast or anything like that. But you talked about, you can have a culture, even an in-office culture, where people are isolated. So this is about isolation.
Yes.
And the culture of your work. You can also have a remote culture that feels cohesive and dignifying and interactive with people. And so,
but it's much harder.
It's much harder. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It sparked this idea that like, there were so many companies that we've worked with, Pat, or organizations that we've served since COVID, where if they had built a real culture, they didn't need a policy to incentivize people to come back to the building. It was the companies that were sort of anemic in their culture that they were like, well, I guess we need a policy to force people to come back to work, which is not solving their problem at all of people feeling isolated. But the ones who invested in the culture that had a thriving, sort of dignifying experience when you walk in the door, they didn't need to say, you know what, everybody's back in the office 5 days a week, because people were chomping at the bit to drive back in and experience that.
It's such an interesting thing, because if you can build a good culture in your organization and a person prefers not to be there, that's actually them saying to you, I don't want to work here. The idea is, rather than just make it about policy, say, let's build a culture that's really based on our values and really rewards good performance and helps people thrive. And then people will opt in or out. And if a person is like, yeah, I don't really get anything from being around other people, then you're like, actually, that doesn't make you a bad person. It just means this is not a good fit for you, because people should want to thrive. But if you have a bad culture, you can have any policy you want. I mean, you can require that people bring their sleeping bags and spend 7 days a week there, and it's not going to matter. Frankly, they're just going to sneak their cocaine water into their hydro flask because it's not about just the policy and the being together. Having said that, I think there's something really interesting. I've heard theories about, if you wanted to destroy a society, what would you do? And the cost of COVID, certainly, and there's all kinds of things we're learning now about COVID afterward. We're not going to go into that. Those are other podcasts. But aside from the people who died and the cost of medicine and healthcare and everything else, the social cost of COVID, kids that were not with other kids and people that weren't working with other people, and some who have still not reconnected, I don't think we can properly calculate the cost that that's had on people. And people will talk about depression and about social development. It's not just about kids in their adolescence. I think it's about adults too. And it's weird, because I think about well, shouldn't I want to work from home? And shouldn't I want to be around my wife or my kids all day long? I think we are built to have multiple relationships and different kinds of relationships. And I don't know a lot of people that say, I work from home every day and I never leave. And it's awesome.
We've done plenty of podcasts on, hey, leader, bringing people in is better, create your culture, all that stuff. But I love the appeal to the human beings, the individuals at work, to say, hey, if there's a part of you, and we've done Myers-Briggs on this podcast, like, hey, there are extroverts and there are introverts, and totally know that the way that those people thrive can be slightly different as it relates to being around other people. But beyond the layer of Myers-Briggs, even under that layer is we were designed to be in community.
Yes. And family is the first community.
Certainly.
But there's more than that.
And so I think the challenge would be if you're an individual contributor thinking, you know what, this whole working with, on Zoom without putting pants on, this is really how I'm thriving. Like this is what I want to do. I think it's a challenge just to say like, hey, there is something innate in all of us that desires human connection and a community. And maybe a lot of people get that outside of work and they feel like, I don't need that on the team, my 9 to 5. But I do think that the best teams, the best cultures, the most productive businesses have the philosophy that we're here not just because of the productivity of this, but there's like a human element that we lean into, that we invest in. And it's a smart, healthy thing. It's a trust. It's a vulnerability, all the things that we talk about on this podcast. But it does lead to healing and thriving and human connection.
It's funny. Laura and I, my wife, we wrote a book years ago. We haven't had it published. We'll probably need to get it published because it's still relevant. We wrote it 35 years ago. Before we got married, we went on a trip and traveled together for 14 days. And we had met so many people who said, yeah, my boyfriend and I, or my fiance and I, we were doing great. And then we went on a 2-week trip to Europe and we really fought all the time. And we were like, why do people do that? And it was interesting. We came up with 10 rules it was called Travel Mates, the 10 rules for co-travel. And one of the things we said is when you're on your trip, spend time away from each other, go do different activities alone, separate. And the idea was, first of all, you need a break. Secondly, you need something to talk about. You need an experience to share with somebody. And if I'm home all day long, all the time, there's very little for Laura and I to talk about.
Yeah.
When she goes and does a project and I go and do a project, we come home and we have something to talk about. We're not meant to be locked together all the time. So there's an argument to be made for, well, working from home is better for family. And I actually, from what I've learned, I think that's probably not true. Now, if it's a miserable place to work, it's probably better for your family. But what we really want is a healthy place to go, heal, develop, help others heal and develop, go home and share what we learn with one another. And so that's really what this is about, is the importance of work for our customers, for one another, for the bottom line. And thank God that we are even more productive when we feel more connected.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about. And just in case we think that's theoretical, there's a bunch of dead rats that overdosed on cocaine water laying in a lab someplace who can attest to the fact that it's much better to have a wheel to run around on and other rats to play with. And if you do that, regular water is just fine. So
I don't know that I could top that ending. So you're going to have to wrap it up.
Hey, thanks for listening to us. We love talking about these liberal arts topics, funny titles. Cody, it's a blast to talk to you. We love our audience, and we will look forward to talking to you next time on At the Table. God bless.